The golden age of gaming. A time where your biggest life decision was whether to spend your last quarter on Street Fighter II or save it for a Mortal Kombat rematch. When the glow of a CRT screen was your guiding light and the sound of 8-bit victory chimes was sweeter than any Spotify playlist today. If you were lucky, your local arcade had the good stuff. The games that made kids sprint straight from their mom's car, straight to a joystick, ready to battle it out for high score supremacy. We're talking about button-mashing masterpieces, side-scrolling sensations, and quarter-sucking legends that defined an era. So whether you grew up in the chaos of an 80s or 90s mall arcade, or discovered these classics through a retro console, buckle up. We're about to discuss the 20 greatest arcade games of the 80s and 90s.
Macho Man Randy Savage, the cream of the crop!
He scores! The Bulls lead 80s.
Girl, your hair's so nappy, Wilson couldn't pick it.
This is Max Headroom.
Are you kidding?
Donkey Kong. What a masterpiece of mayhem and heart. Released in 1981, Donkey Kong broke the mold by introducing us to Jumpman, who later famously became known as Mario, who risked life, limb, and a whole lot of pride to rescue his beloved Pauline from the clutches of our barrel-throwing primate antagonist. The genius of Donkey Kong lies in its simplicity paired with relentless challenge. Every level was a pulse-pounding dance of dodging barrels, timing your jumps just right, and mastering those tricky ladders. It was as if the game whispered, sure, you can beat me if you're as bold as you are a little bit crazy. But beyond the chaos, Donkey Kong delivered a narrative twist that was rare for its time. It wasn't merely about racking up points. It was about embarking on a perilous quest, one that tugged at your emotions and dared you to defy the odds. The game's quirky charm, unforgettable characters, and pioneering design elements made every session an adventure filled with equal parts frustration and triumph. Donkey Kong was a cultural phenomenon that taught us that every leap of faith, every narrowly avoided barrel, and every triumphant rescue was a victory against the odds. It's a timeless reminder of why we fell in love with the arcade in the first place. For the sheer thrill of the chase, the joy of mastering the impossible, and of course, the laughs we shared along the way. Can you picture rolling into an arcade just to be captivated by a bright yellow circle with a giant smile, gobbling up dots like it's an all-you-can-eat buffet? Well, that's Pac-Man. This little hero, born in 1980, was developed by Namco and inspired by a pizza missing a slice. Yes, really, that's true. Pac-Man broke the mold of its shooting and space-exploding contemporaries by inviting everyone, kids, adults, and even your cool uncle, to join in the maze-running, dot-munching fun. What made Pac-Man revolutionary? For starters, its simplicity was its superpower. With no blood, gore, or complex controls to worry about, it was an instant crowd pleaser that anyone could pick up and play. The challenge? Evading 4 quirky ghosts with names as memorable as Inky, Blinky, Pinky, and Clyde. Each ghost had its own personality and unpredictable moves, turning every maze into a delightful dance of strategy and split-second decision-making. Pac-Man's charm wasn't limited to its gameplay alone. It sparked a frenzy of merchandise inspired by hit songs and even carved out a niche in pop culture that endures to this day. In an era dominated by pixelated heroes and spaceship shootouts, Pac-Man's whimsical design and universal appeal proved that sometimes less really is more. So whether you're a hardcore gamer or someone who just loves a good underdog story, Pac-Man's legacy reminds us all that a simple idea, combined with a dash of creativity and a pinch of humor, can change the world of gaming forever. Super Mario Brothers. So let's talk Super Mario Brothers, the game that turned the entire video game industry on its head in the 1980s. Imagine you're Mario, a plumber from Brooklyn, and you're on a quest to rescue Princess Toadstool from the evil clutches of Bowser. Sure, It sounds like an average damsel in distress story, but what made this game a legend wasn't just the plot, it was the experience. You had a pixelated, but somehow charming 8-bit world with pipes, mushrooms, and a whole lot of jumping. And let's not forget about the sound. That jump sound? Iconic. The coin sound? It still rings in your ears even decades later. You could practically hear the Mamma Mia as Mario dodged Goombas, crushed Koopa shells, and jumped his way to victory. This was the game that introduced millions to the magic of platformers. But what set it apart was its perfect blend of challenge and accessibility. You weren't just running around smashing things, well, I guess a little bit. You were solving puzzles, timing jumps, and figuring out secret blocks and hidden pipes. Plus, it had that unbeatable two-player mode where you and your buddy could take turns keeping the rivalry and the fun alive. Super Mario Bros. Was a cultural milestone that made people say just one more try, even when they failed 50 times in a row. This was definitely a quarter eater, and that's what made it one of the best arcade games of the 80s and 90s. It captured hearts, it made players want to play more, and had a certain timelessness that made it more than just a product of its time. Street Fighter II. Oh yes. The game that turned every arcade into a battleground of bruised egos, sweaty palms, and quarters stacked like battle trophies. Released in '91, this wasn't just a game, this was a cultural phenomenon. It took the bones of the original Street Fighter, which, let's all be honest here, nobody really played that seriously, and transformed it into a technical, strategic, and downright addictive masterpiece. First, let's talk about the roster. 8 colorful, charismatic fighters, each with their own unique moves, backstory, and country of origin. You had Ryu, or Ryu as some say, the disciplined martial artist with the Hadouken that launched friendships and rivalries. Guile, the American military dude with the flattest hair in the video game industry. Chun-Li, the first female fighter in the series who made rapid kicking an art form. And of course, my man Blanca, a green electric jungle monster, because why not? Then there were the combos. Accidental at first, but later refined into an art form. Combos turned Street Fighter II into more than just a button mashing contest. You actually had to learn the mechanics, read your opponent, and execute pixel perfect moves. Pulling off a Hadouken at the right moment felt like winning the lottery, except instead of money, you got bragging rights and the joy of seeing your opponent's character crumple to the ground. Bottom line, Street Fighter II wasn't just a game, it was the game at the time. The one that made the fighting genre explode and paved the way for esports and ensured that phrases like Hadouken and Sonic Boom would live in our collective gaming memories forever. And if you weren't there to witness the chaos firsthand, well, daggone, you missed out on one of the greatest video game experiences of all time.
Marvel vs. Capcom!
This game had gamers in a chokehold. It wasn't just a battle, it was a full-blown pop culture party that redefined the fighting genre in the late 90s. At its core, it was like assembling your dream team from the ultimate comic book and video game crossover. Want to see Spider-Man swing alongside Ryu? Or Iron Man lock it down with Mega Man? The game offered a tag team system that let you mix and match characters and combos so insane, they'd have even your most die-hard fan doing a double take. Every match was an energetic, colorful ballet of flashy special moves, explosive combo chains, and witty character banter that made each battle feel like an epic mini-movie. But what truly set it apart was its heart. With a roster bursting at the seams with heroes, anti-heroes, and villains from 2 entirely different worlds, the game was a joyful celebration of geek culture, a place where button mashing felt delightful, and every fight was a chance to create your own comic book ending. In an era where arcades were the ultimate hangout, Marvel vs. Capcom delivered not just a game, but a nostalgic, adrenaline-pumping experience that left players grinning from ear to ear. This was a wild, wonderfully over-the-top ride through the realms of fantasy and fun, where every button pressed echoed the call to be a hero or a villain, and the grandest crossover of them all. WWF Wrestlefest. Yeah, I know, it's the WWE now, but back then, it was WWF. And there was nothing like stepping up to an arcade cabinet that practically roared, "Get ready to rumble." This was a game that wasn't just about button mashing. It was an invitation to unleash your inner wrestling superstar. Released in the early 90s, this game captured the raw, unbridled excitement of professional wrestling at a time when arcades were our social coliseums. With a roster of colorful characters, each boasting outrageous moves and personality quirks straight out of a wrestling promo, WrestleFest let you deliver suplexes, pile drivers, and signature maneuvers that defied both gravity and the laws of common sense, all while laughing at the sheer absurdity of it all. But it wasn't just the moves that made this a hit. There was something magical about how the game blended high-octane action with tongue-in-cheek humor. Every match felt like a mini WrestleMania, where every body slam was a ticket to your own personal adrenaline rush, and every cheer from the virtual crowd sent your heart racing. Whether you were squaring off against a friend or the computer, it was a roller coaster of electrifying energy and playful bravado. It's no wonder that even decades later, fans still recall the thrill of stepping into the ring, ready to channel a bit of their favorite wrestling legend into every punch and pinfall.
Get ready.
Imagine strapping into the cockpit of a supersonic fighter jet, heart pounding as you prepare to tear through the enemy lines at breakneck speeds. Well, welcome to Afterburner. Released by Sega in '87, this arcade masterpiece didn't just let you play a game, it made you feel like a true ace pilot, hurtling through a storm of enemy fire and explosive action. Also, be it that the movie Top Gun, released just 1 year before this came out, already had us clamoring to be a fighter pilot. What set Afterburner apart was its revolutionary sense of speed and immersion. At a time when most games were content with 2D sprites and simple mechanics, Afterburner took flight, literally, by simulating a 3D behind-the-throttle experience. You weren't just moving left or right, you were banking, diving, and thrusting forward, all while dodging missiles and enemy jets that zoomed past in a blur of color and chaos. The adrenaline rush was real, and if you ever got a chance to try one of those specialized rotating arcade cabinets, woo, you knew you were in for a wild, full-body ride. And let's talk visuals and sound. Afterburner delivered jaw-dropping, for its time, sprite scaling effects and a pulsating soundtrack that made each dogfight feel like the climax of an action blockbuster. The vibrant graphics were more than eye candy. They were a bold statement that arcade gaming was stepping into a new era of immersive excitement. So why does Afterburner earn its spot on this list? Because it captured the pure thrill of flight, turned every play session into an exhilarating escape from gravity, and reminded us that sometimes all you need is a fast jet, a few coins, and the courage to dive headfirst into the action. It made you believe, even if just for a few minutes, that you could defy gravity and outmaneuver destiny itself. Gauntlet.
Pressure 100 points.
This is a game that wasn't content with being another joystick pummeling fest, but instead refined multiplayer mayhem in the mid-'80s. Released in '85, Gauntlet was a delightful mix of dungeon crawling, button mashing, and strategic treasure hoarding. You chose your destiny by becoming one of 4 heroes: the brawny warrior, the fierce Valkyrie, the mystical wizard, or the nimble elf. Each character brought a different flavor to the fray, offering players a taste of their own heroic fantasy. Nothing beat the thrill of huddling with 3 friends, each commandeering their own character as you collectively dive into a labyrinth cluttered with goblins, ghosts, and other nightmares. What truly set Gauntlet apart was its innovative cooperative play. Instead of a solitary quest, it was a team effort where every victory was shared and every defeat was, well, shared too. Ever found yourself arguing over who hogged the health potions or debating whose turn it is to take on the relentless horde? That, my friend, that's part of the magic. Sure, you might have spent more time dashing through winding corridors and frantically grabbing power-ups than actually learning the layout, but that's exactly what made Gauntlet so endearingly unpredictable. It wasn't about perfect navigation. It was about the wild, unbridled fun of diving headfirst into a digital dungeon where every corner promised either treasure or trouble. Gauntlet blended strategy, cooperation, and sheer adrenaline into one unforgettable experience, making it a cornerstone of 80s and 90s gaming. Spider-Man.
Spider-Man.
Spider sense tingling, signaling danger.
Spider-Man in the arcade era was like a burst of superhero adrenaline in a cabinet. This game wasn't just about button mashing, it was a love letter to comic book fans everywhere. Back when arcades ruled our weekends, stepping up to a Spider-Man machine meant you were signing up for a whirlwind of pixelated parkour and web-slinging action that captured the very soul of the beloved Marvel hero. Imagine the thrill. You take on the role of our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, dodging dastardly foes and leaping across rooftops with the kind of gravity-defying flair that only a true hero could muster. The game's vibrant, hand-drawn graphics and punchy sound effects might seem modest by today's standards, but in the neon-lit arcades of the 80s and 90s, they were nothing short of revolutionary. It was a rare treat, combining just enough challenge with pure, unadulterated fun, and a dash of cheeky humor that made you feel like you were a part of your very own comic book adventure. Sure, it wasn't a sprawling open-world saga, but its tight, responsive gameplay and the unmistakable charm of swinging into battle made every coin drop worth it. It reminded us that even if you couldn't really climb walls or stick to skyscrapers in real life, for a few magical minutes, you were Spider-Man. Heroic, witty, and just a little bit invincible. In a nutshell, the Spider-Man arcade game wasn't just another title, it was an experience that made you believe that with enough spunk and enough quarters, you could take on the world. Oh, OutRun, the game that lands you right on the sun-drenched coastlines of the 1980s, a place where your biggest worry was choosing the perfect scenic route rather than your next existential crisis. Developed by Sega and unleashed on arcade cabinets in 1986, OutRun wasn't just a racing game, it was an invitation to hit the open road in a convertible that practically whispered, "Let's break some speed limits and maybe a few rules." At its core, OutRun was pure liberation. With its revolutionary branching paths, players weren't forced down a single monotonous highway. They could choose their own adventure at every turn, much like picking a flavor at an ice cream shop. Each path presented its own dazzling display of vibrant backdrops, palm-lined boulevards, neon-lit tunnels, and shimmering sunsets that made every lap feel like a mini vacation. And let's talk about that soundtrack. Composed by Hiroshi Kawaguchi, the pulsing synth beats weren't just background noise, they were the heartbeat of the game, turning every twist of the wheel into a scene straight out of a summer blockbuster. It wasn't merely about racing against the clock. It was about racing towards a feeling, an experience so immersive it could make even the most mundane daydream feel like a high-speed getaway. In a world where arcade games were often predictable as a tax return, OutRun was a breath of fresh, ocean-scented air, a delightful blend of groundbreaking graphics, ingenious design, and that irresistible urge to just, well, drive. So if you ever feel nostalgic for a time when the biggest decision was whether to take that left toward a sunset or a right turn into a neon wonderland, just remember, OutRun had you covered, one thrilling mile at a time, which helped solidify it as one of the greatest games of its era. Battletoads.
Stomping time!
Come on, this game was ridiculous. Okay, picture this. It's the golden age of arcades where neon lights and the relentless clatter of joysticks set the stage for pure, unadulterated gaming mayhem. And then enter Battletoads. A game that didn't just push the envelope, It shredded it with the ferocity of its 3 rebellious amphibian anti-heroes. Say that 3 times fast. Battletoads was more than your average side-scrolling beat-em-up. It was an adrenaline-fueled, tongue-in-cheek roller coaster that dared you to laugh in the face of absurdity while your fingers danced frantically over the buttons. With its bizarre over-the-top levels, think turbocharged tunnels, vicious baddies, and traps that were as diabolical as they were hilarious. The game carved a niche that was equal parts challenge and charm. The magic in the game lay in its deliciously punishing difficulty. Every level was a test of nerve and nimbleness, making you feel like a triumphant warrior when you finally conquered that notorious stage. And let's be honest, a bit like a masochist when you got repeatedly pulverized by its onslaught. Yet, in that shared struggle, a whole generation of gamers found camaraderie, laughing and occasionally crying over the misadventures of our riveting heroes. So why does Battletoads still hop into our hearts today as one of the 20 best arcade games from the 80s and 90s? Because it combined cartoonish humor, relentless action, and a level of challenge that kept you coming back for more, proving that sometimes embracing chaos is exactly what makes a game unforgettable.
X-Men.
This is the game that made every arcade warrior feel like they had mutant powers. Released in '94, this game spoke to arcade goers' soul. It screamed, hey, you. Yeah, you with the quarter. You're gonna feed me all your money and you're gonna love doing it. This was the era when 2D fighters were ruling the arcade scene, and Capcom, fresh off the success of Street Fighter II, decided to spice things up by injecting Marvel's most beloved mutants into the mix. The result? A visually stunning, combo-heavy, hyperkinetic slugfest where Wolverine could actually berserker barrage the living daylights out of his enemies, and Magneto could flex his Omega-level dominance with moves so powerful they felt unfair, because honestly, they kinda were. The game also features insane special moves and X-Power Gauge super attacks, paving the way for Capcom's later crossover madness with Marvel vs. Capcom. And the roster? Absolute gold. And don't even get me started on Juggernaut, because, well, he's the Juggernaut. But the real showstopper? Magneto as the final boss. If you manage to reach him after enduring some quarter-gobbling battles, you were greeted by one of the most punishing AI opponents in arcade history. He didn't just beat you, he obliterated you, making sure you left that arcade questioning every life decision you had made up to that point. In short, X-Men was a video game enthusiast's rite of passage. It had jaw-dropping animation, addictive gameplay, and enough mutant mayhem to keep fans and their wallets coming back for more. It was a bridge between old school fighters and the Marvel vs. Capcom insanity we'd come to love in the future. If you grew up in the 90s and you never played this, man, I have to ask, were you even living? Final Fight. This was another brawler that made every arcade goer in the late 80s and early 90s feel like an unstoppable street fighting machine, at least until they ran out of quarters. Released by Capcom in 1989, Final Fight was the gold standard of side-scrolling beat-em-ups, bringing a mix of brutal action, over-the-top characters, and just the right amount of absurdity to keep us hooked. The story? Well, that was pure 80s action movie perfection. The Mad Gear Gang kidnaps Jessica, here we go again, the daughter of Metro City's muscle-bound mayor, Mike Hager, a former pro wrestler who clearly skipped the politics part of his job description and went straight to crush bad guys with my bare hands. Alongside Jessica's boyfriend, Cody, and his friend, Guy, you punch, pile drive, and flying kick your way through wave after wave of thugs with names like Poison and Abigail. Yeah, because the 80s were wild like that. But it wasn't just the story. Final Fight was a feast for the senses. The graphics, gorgeous for the time, with massive, well-animated sprites that gave every punch a bone-crunching weight. The sound? Every impact had that satisfying thud that made you feel the pain of your enemies, and occasionally yourself when you got blindsided. And let's not forget the food logic. Somehow, entire roast turkeys and fully intact pizzas were just lying in oil drums, waiting to be eaten in the middle of a gang-infested city. But hey, if it gives you full health, who the heck am I to question it? Final Fight set the bar for all beat-em-ups that followed. It was so influential that games like Streets of Rage and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Turtles in Time took heavy inspiration from it. Even today, it's remembered as one of Capcom's finest arcade achievements, proving that sometimes the best way to clean up a city isn't through policy, it's through pile drivers.
Cowabunga!
Oh man, this game robbed you of quarters without having to use a gun and made you feel like you were right in the middle of a Saturday morning cartoon. Released in 1989 by Konami, this game wasn't just a beat 'em up. It was a pizza-fueled, Foot Clan smashing, cowabunga shouting experience that defined what an arcade game should be. First off, the 4-player co-op was revolutionary. You and 3 of your crew could roll up to the cabinet, pick your favorite turtle, whether Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, or Raphael, and button mash your way through wave after wave of foot soldiers, mousers, and of course, the ever-annoying Krang and Shredder. The action was fast, the levels were bursting with bright, cartoon-accurate visuals, and the soundtrack, pure 8-bit adrenaline. Everything about this game screamed 80s, 90s perfection. The animations were smooth, the combat was simple but oh so satisfying, and the boss fights against Bebop, Rocksteady, and the Technodrome felt like epic movie battles. Plus, the cabinet itself, a work of art. That thing radiated coolness in every arcade, glowing like a beacon to any kid who have ever yelled cowabunga at their TV. You'd burn through an allowance faster than Splinter could say, "My sons." But that didn't matter, because for those few minutes, you were a Ninja Turtle, and that was priceless. Double Dragon was the game that made every 80s and 90s kid feel like a total thugged out street fighting machine, even if their real life toughest moment was just arguing over whose turn it was to play next. Released in 1987, this side-scrolling beat-em-up set the gold standard for co-op arcade brawlers. You and a buddy, well, actually, more often than not, it was just some random arcade dude that popped in a quarter, but that was just fine, that's fine. Took control of the Lee brothers, Billy and Jimmy, as they punched, kicked, and elbow smashed their way through waves of thugs to rescue Marion. Because apparently in the 80s, video game girlfriends were always getting kidnapped. Double Dragon introduced gamers to the magic of 2-player co-op, letting friends team up for some true street justice. Unless, of course, you were that annoying, irritating guy who, quote unquote, accidentally kept throwing his partner into enemy attacks. That was so frustrating and annoying. The game's gritty urban setting, smooth-ish combat mechanics, and the thrill of wielding baseball bats, whips, and knives made every playthrough feel like an 80s action movie starring you. And let's not forget the brutal twist ending. After all that effort, if you played co-op, you had to fight each other for the girl. Talk about sibling rivalry at its peak. With its impact on the beat-em-up genre and a legacy that spawned sequels, spin-offs, and even a hilariously awful movie, Double Dragon remains one of the greatest arcade classics ever.
Johnny Cage.
The game that made parents clutch their pearls, politicians lose their minds, and arcade owners are rich beyond their wildest dreams. When Mortal Kombat hit the arcade in 1992, it was jaw-dropping. Unlike the bright cartoonish fights of Street Fighter II, Mortal Kombat went full Hollywood with digitized actors, bone-crushing sound effects, and enough blood to make a horror movie director blush. Oh, and those lovely fatalities. The finishing moves that were so brutal, so over the top, that they practically invented the video game rating system. Yes, I'm looking at you, ESRB. The roster, iconic. You had Scorpion, the undead ninja who made "get over here" a household phrase. Sub-Zero, his icy rival with spine-ripping tendencies. Raiden, the literal god of thunder, and of course, Johnny Cage, who made punching people into growing a legitimate strategy. The gameplay? Tight, responsive, and full of secrets. Like Reptile, the hidden green ninja you could only fight under specific conditions. And let's not forget the classic division. Were you Team Scorpion or were you Team Sub-Zero? This debate divided playgrounds and broke friendships faster than someone rage quitting after getting uppercutted into the pit. But beyond the controversy, beyond the shock factor, Mortal Kombat was just plain fun. It was a game that made you feel powerful, made you laugh at times, and made you come back for just one more round, which we all know never just meant one more round. Mortal Kombat wasn't just one of the best arcade games of the 90s. It was a game so legendary that it didn't just change arcades, it changed gaming history. And in my book, that is an undisputed, flawless victory. Oh man, this game right here took so much of my money, it could have put my child through college. The game that made you believe in the impossible. Before you ever saw Steph Curry casually draining threes from the friggin' parking lot, NBA Jam had players launching from half court, spinning like human tornadoes, and igniting the hoop in a blaze of pixelated glory. Released in 1993, this midway masterpiece was an over-the-top, adrenaline-fueled, gravity-defying joy to behold. What made NBA Jam legendary? Well, first off, it ditched realism and went full throttle on arcade insanity. 2-on-2 matchups meant non-stop action, high-flying dunks, and no pesky things like fouls or rules to slow you down. Get that out of here. Turbo meters let you zip across the court like a caffeinated cheetah. And if you nailed 3 shots in a row, you were officially on fire, sinking buckets from ridiculous distances while making your opponent question their life choices. Half the magic of NBA Jam was in its attitude. The game had sass, style, and that iconic voiceover from Tim Kitzrow, who turned simple phrases into pure gold. Is it the shoes? Rejected. He's heating up. It was like having your own personal hype man screaming in your ear every time you pulled off a ridiculous dunk. NBA Jam wasn't just one of the best arcade games of the 90s. It was a cultural movement. It turned arcades into battlegrounds, friendships into rivalries, and quarters into distant memories. Even decades later, if I scream out, boom shakalaka, you know exactly what's up. Dragon's Lair and Space Ace.
Lead on, adventurer. Your quest awaits.
Dragon's Lair was an arcade game that was equal parts mesmerizing, frustrating, and wallet draining. Released in 1983, this wasn't just another button-mashing, pixelated slugfest. No, Dragon's Lair was a cinematic experience, an interactive cartoon that looked like it belonged in a Saturday morning lineup rather than a dimly lit arcade full of kids hopped up on soda and questionable pizza. Created by Don Bluth, the former Disney animator behind The Secret of NIMH, I love that movie. The game boasted jaw-dropping, hand-drawn animation that made everything else in the arcade look like it was stuck in the Stone Age. You played as Dirk the Daring, a chivalrous yet perpetually clumsy knight, on a mission to rescue the ridiculously named Princess Daphne from the clutches of Singe, a fire-breathing dragon with a serious attitude problem. But here's what made it game-changing. Dragon's Lair wasn't your typical joystick-smashing affair. It was a quick-time event pioneered before anyone even knew what it was. You had to press the right button or move the joystick at the exact moment the game demanded, or else Dirk met a hilariously animated yet absurdly brutal demise. And let's be real, most players spent more time watching Dirk get electrocuted, crushed, or vaporized than actually making progress. It was kind of like the Dark Souls of the arcade era. Despite its brutal difficulty, Dragon's Lair was a spectacle. Arcades placed it front and center, drawing crowds mesmerized by its vibrant animation. And because it used a laser disc, it cost a whopping 50 cents per play, twice the price of a normal game. That meant every misstep hurt, not just emotionally, but financially. Yet, for those who did manage to conquer the treacherous castle and defeat Singe, which I was not one of them, the bragging rights were legendary. And Dragon's Lair didn't just fade into obscurity. It spawned sequels, a Saturday morning cartoon, and even a spin-off, so to speak, which leads me to its successor, Space Ace.
The fate of Earth is in your hands.
There's Bork's ship.
Now, this game truly made you feel like you were a Saturday morning cartoon hero and stole all your quarters while doing it. Released in 1984, again by Don Bluth and Cinematronics, this Laserdisc classic was the spiritual successor to Dragon's Lair, but with a sci-fi twist. Instead of a bubbling knight, you played as Ace, a beefy space bro who kept getting zapped into his puny teenage form Dexter. Your mission? To rescue the ever-sassy Kimberly from the clutches of the evil commander Borf. That's right, I said Borf, because every 80s villain needed a name that sounded both goofy and menacing, I guess. Space Ace was less of a game and more of a playable animated movie, and boy, was it gorgeous. The hand-drawn animation straight from Don Bluth's studio was pure eye candy, looking like something ripped straight from The Secret of NIMH or An American Tail. And while the gameplay was all about quick reflexes and memorizing the right moves, every successful input rewarded you with another dazzling snippet of action-packed animation. However, every wrong one took you back to the frustrating experience of playing Dragon's Lair. The game was truly Dragon's Lair on steroids. This game was brutal. You had to memorize every move perfectly or you'd be treated to a beautifully animated death scene over and over and over again. It was a quarter-munching beast, but hey, I guess that was kind of part of the fun. Even though Space Ace never got the same shine as Dragon's Lair, doesn't mean it wasn't as legendary. It remains one of the most visually stunning and uniquely charming arcade experiences of an era.
Rise from your grave.
Altered Beast is the game that basically said, "Rise from your grave," and then proceeded to punch, kick, and growl its way into legendary status. Released by Sega in 1988, this side-scrolling beat-em-up was a game that made you feel like a demigod, quite literally. The premise was Zeus himself resurrects you, yes, you, the buffest, most toga-wearing dude imaginable, to rescue his kidnapped daughter Athena from the Dark Lord Neph. And how do you go about this noble quest? By punching the absolute soul out of zombies, demons, and other unfortunate creatures standing in your way. But here's where it gets really fun. Every time you grab those mystical spirit orbs from white two-headed wolves, you bulk up like a mythological Schwarzenegger. Get 3 orbs and boom, you transform into a literal beast. Werewolf, dragon, bear, tiger, you name it, each with its own devastating attacks. Sure, the controls were a bit stiff and the game was unforgivingly difficult because quarter munching was an absolute art form back then, but it had personality. It was ridiculous, over the top, and exactly the kind of game that made the 80s and 90s arcade special. Altered Beast was a bizarre, slightly janky, but utterly glorious power fantasy that made every player feel like a muscle-bound, shape-shifting warrior on a mission from the gods. And for that, it remains one of the best arcade games of its era. Oh, The Simpsons. This glorious button-mashing, quarter-devouring piece of video game excellence had 90s kids practically emptying their pockets just for another shot at rescuing Maggie. Released in 1991 by Konami, this beat-em-up took everything we loved about America's favorite animated family and cranked it up on full, chaotic, side-scrolling mayhem mode. Each character had their own unique fighting style. Homer brawled with his bare hands like a dad trying to reclaim the remote. Marge wielded a vacuum cleaner like a suburban warrior. Bart swung his skateboard like a true menace. And Lisa whipped enemies with her jump rope, because that's what 10-year-olds do apparently. Oh, and if you played co-op, you could pull off hilarious team-up attacks like Bart and Lisa holding hands to create a deadly spinning attack of sibling destruction. The game was vibrant, fast-paced, and packed with inside jokes for Simpsons fans, from Krusty Balloons to Duff Beer billboards. It even had some of the show's original voice cast, adding an extra layer of authenticity. And let's not forget the sheer absurdity. One minute you're fighting suit-clad businessmen in the streets. The next, you're battling a giant bowling ball in a trippy dream sequence. Like any great arcade game though, it was brutally difficult. Designed to suck down your quarters faster than Homer at an all-you-can-eat buffet. But that didn't stop us. Whether you played solo or with 3 friends crowded around the cabinet, the Simpsons arcade game was a perfect mix of nostalgia, chaos, and Springfield-infused absurdity. Even today, it's remembered as one of the greatest arcade beat-em-ups ever made. If you got a chance to play it back in the day, congrats, you're officially cool and a part of gaming history. If not, well, grab some donuts, fire up an emulator, and prepare for a really fun trip down memory lane. And that's my list. That's my 20 awesome arcade games of the 80s and 90s that certainly defined an era. What do you think? What games did I leave off? I'm sure I left off some great ones because this list could have probably ran forever. Let me know your favorites down in the comments. Until then, you know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe, but most importantly, love you, love somebody else, and I will see y'all soon. Happy gaming, everybody. Have a great one.